everyone. Today on Stocks to Watch, we're spotlighting a company positioning itself at the forefront of North America's emerging critical minerals strategy, North American Niobium. They're listed on the Canadian Securities Exchange as NIOB, the Frankfurt Stock Exchange is IOR, and the OTCQB in the United States is NIOMF. So, with only one producing niobium mine in the continent and growing demand across defense, energy, and advanced manufacturing, investors are increasingly watching early stage exploration leaders who can really help secure domestic supply. And we'll talk a lot about that today. Joining us, our CEO, Murray Nye, and Vice President of Exploration, Clyde McMillan. I'd like to welcome you both to Stocks to Watch.
Very nice to
Thanks,
see you again,
Ashley.
Ashley.
Yes, absolutely. So, starting with the geological rationale and exploration focus, Clyde, I'd like to ask you about the fundamentals and what makes this specific region so geologically attractive for niobium and critical minerals exploration in general. And what early indicators would you say led North American Niobium and Critical Minerals Corp to prioritize it?
Yes, absolutely. So thanks, Ashley. So North American Niobium and Critical Minerals Corp. So the company is located in the biggest Proterozoic belt in the world. So these are rocks approximately of 1 billion years old. The company, we've identified this province as the province with the most abundant critical mineral occurrences and deposits. And of course, there are the nearby mines in the area. We have big deposits such as the NIOB mine, and we're also looking at other critical mineral deposits in the area. So that is what led us to specifically to this geological province.
Fantastic. And, North America's only producing niobium mine, as I mentioned, is located within this broader geological belt. And there's another project I understand that's currently advancing. So, how does this regional context, would you say, shape the strategy behind your current exploration work? Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos.
Yes, absolutely. So there are two types of deposits located in the region in Quebec. So, of course, the biggest one is the NIOB mine, which is roughly 400 million tons at 0.4% niobium pentoxide. So this is what we call a carbonatite deposit. And so that's one type of deposit. And then we've got the other one, which is seeing the other comparable, which is called the Lac Crevier project. It's a 25 million ton deposit at 0.2% niobium pentoxide. And this deposit is different from the NIOB. It's a granitic pegmatite deposit. So what we're seeing here, we're seeing two types of deposits that could potentially host large critical mineral deposits.
Certainly sounds very significant when you talk about just the scale of this. Murray, I'd like to ask you, and we've had these discussions before. I know there's tremendous pressure from governments and industry to secure sources of critical minerals, especially in the United States and elsewhere. So how does your early stage exploration work support the longer term goal of strengthening North America's potential supply of niobium and other critical minerals too?
Yes, well, Ashley, thanks for the question. Nice seeing you again. It's absolutely essential that we have these minerals in North America. Currently, the Quebec produces about 7% of the world's niobium, NIOB mine. Most of the rest comes from Brazil, which the Chinese own about 15 or 20% of that mine in Brazil, and most of that production goes offshore to China for further processing. So there's really a shortfall within North America, especially for critical minerals like this. The other thing that we're exploring for too, besides the niobium, is and forgive me, Clyde, if I pronounce these wrong, but the praseodymium and the neodymium and the total rare earth elements, which are used primarily for rare earth magnets, which every electric motor in the world needs and all of that supply, or most of that supply, comes from China as well. The interesting thing about this, and why I got so keen after talking to Clyde and being introduced to him and his and the guys on the ground there is the fact that these things are very, very large potentials. The pegmatite dikes, there was a big discovery of lithium about 10, 12 years ago located in these dikes. And these are massive deposits, 100 million tons. We have one that's 50 to 70 meters wide at the moment. We did a channel sample on it that seemed to go on forever. So I think we've got a real potential to find something very significant. I don't think it's a question of us actually hitting the targets with the drill. I think it's a question, how much grade will they hold? So I think we've got a very, very exciting project ahead of us. It needs to be proven out with the drilling, but that won't take long. We're planning on doing some drilling probably the first quarter of this year, 2026, sorry.
Thank you for that, Murray. And, I'd like to just add a quick question here about the importance of niobium. I talked a little bit about it in the intro, but if you can just, help our investors understand, for those that may not be, just what it's used for and why it's so critical.
It's used in steel primarily, and then there's some new applications that are currently being tested. One of them is, it's a company called Volt, something like that. And they've got fast charging systems using niobium. For instance, it would take fast charging an EV down from 1 hour down to 6 minutes. So there's some really interesting applications for the minerals, and it's growing all the time.
Certainly appreciate that. And you talked about, Murray, the potential here and the potential scale. So Clyde, I'd like to ask you, you talked about geology in your target area. I understand that it mirrors some regions with major lithium discoveries. What does that imply about the scale of the deposits you're exploring today?
Yes, absolutely. What's interesting is when we looked at all the big lithium granitic pegmatic systems, we've acquired so much knowledge in the past 7 to 10 years. We know the shapes of these ore bodies. We know the tonnage potential of these ore bodies. And of course, the lithium hard rock mines. They grade approximately, 1% Li2O. And in the same systems here, we see granitic pegmatites. However, we don't see the lithium. Here we see rare earths in these rocks. We see neodymium potential. We see rare earths. We see niobium potential. We also see yttrium, dysprosium. So at the moment, we're assessing all of our projects, targets. And so this is currently what we're aiming at, to try and cover those critical elements in these projects.
Yeah, and I just can't stress enough the importance of them. So when you're hitting them and talking about them, and what you're seeing, it is paramount, especially when you consider the state of North America today and the need. And Murray, you talked about the percentage of what China owns, what China has. It's shocking to me when I see this, and I see the percentages and how few there are in North America, ownership wise. And so the work you're doing here is really, really important. And I will add that, there are relatively few junior exploration companies really focused on niobium right now. So how does being one of the early high conviction players really shape your strategy and the opportunity ahead?
Thanks, Ashley. One of the things when we first started looking at this was, Clyde and his team had staked some very, very interesting targets. And when I looked at this, I thought, if this does turn out, I think we've got to increase our land package. So one of the things we did, right off the bat was we increased it from a few thousand hectares up to 30,000 hectares. And we're still looking at other prospects and staking those as well. So we've got a very, very comprehensive land package in the area. So if something didn't materialize, I think it would be very, very exciting. I think, something like, North American tungsten, when we first started that project, we were one of the first companies looking at the tungsten space. So we're looking at niobium kind of on the same track. We kind of want to be first out of the gate there. So there's not a lot of explorers for niobium right now. Clyde mentioned that one company that does have that 25 million ton deposit. I think there's a couple others. But the interesting thing about this is when they discovered the lithium deposits, and call it in the northern part of Quebec, all of a sudden you couldn't find an acre or a hectare to stake. It was all covered immediately. So I think that gives us a huge advantage. If we happen to be fortunate enough to hit something, we're in a very, very good position, and it could get very, very exciting, especially with the structure of these things and how big they could be. You're talking maybe 25, 50, 100 million tons, which gives you a very, very long mine life. And there's a saying in the industry, you buy on mystery and you sell on history. So, we've got a really nice drill program starting in the first quarter of this year, and I think it's going to get pretty exciting if we're happy to get fortunate to hit something. And one of the things that I just mentioned this, that one of the areas that we really, really like is right off a logging road. You can actually see the pegmatitic dikes going one after another. So to set up a drill would be a matter of just off the truck onto the road, and we could drill that target right from a logging road. And the logistics is what I like too, because Clyde and I were on the biggest property, the Seigneurie, and we drove along a major highway right along the St. Lawrence River, went up about 2 kilometers or so to an area that we got out of the truck and started hiking. And we're only like 700 meters from the big target. But when we got out of the truck, we found another pegmatitic dike, and it got pretty exciting just looking at that. So I'm getting an education from Clyde. It's really interesting. Thanks.
Well, it certainly sounds like you're onto something. It leads me perfectly into my next question to Clyde about community engagement, because you're saying, it's right there on the road. Obviously, this exploration, this work requires collaboration with Indigenous and local communities. So, Clyde, how would you say you're building long-term trust-based relationships as your projects move forward?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, great question, Ashley. So what we're doing is we are contacting the local communities first. What we want to do is, well, what we have already done is we've got face-to-face meetings with the local municipalities, with the First Nations, and and also that's also part of this a new permitting process in Quebec. That's fairly new, and I think at the moment what I've seen it's going to make drastic improvements to the mining industry. People want to be educated, and if they're not educated, they want to be educated, and it sort of humanizes the whole process. So that for us is excellent. What I see is that it's there to build, strong relationships, and so what we're seeing at the moment is very positive.
I like how you say that it humanizes the whole process.
Yeah.
I think that that is so important. So thank you for hitting on that, because we have to be reminded, because the work you're doing is so important and will be so important for the future. So Murray, I'll ask you, we've talked about your mission, your vision, what you're doing. Let's talk about moving forward as you advance your programs. What milestones should investors watch for, and how would you say those steps align with your long-term vision for really becoming a major contributor to North America's critical minerals landscape?
Thanks, Ashley. One of the things that's we have, in the queue, call it right now, is we've done a lot of field work, channel sampling, soil samples. We're going to do some geophysics on the properties. Like I said, I think it was the longest channel sample I've ever seen on the Seigneurie project. So we're waiting for those results. That's going to give us a really good idea of how that might turn out, because we'll have some data on the grade and whatnot. The other thing that's interesting is we're on some of the other claims we found some carbonatites, and that's very exciting. Those things are rare.
Yeah.
We recently put out a what they call a flow through share financing, which is a tax incentive type of financing for investors. Basically, the company can't use the write-off. So what the term flow through means is the expenses are flowed through to the investor. So we put that out at a slight premium to the market at $1.38. And I'm going to say within a week or even less, we were oversubscribed for that financing. So there's some pretty interesting feedback we're getting from investors. And we put it out at 2.5 million, and we were subscribed for 2.8. I think had let the timeline go a little further, we could have brought in maybe 3.3 or 3.5 million. So we're fully financed for the project in the first quarter, which is exciting. And the toughest thing in this business right now is raising money. I've been doing this a very, very long time. It is the number one obstacle in advancing these things. So we've got some exciting news flow coming, I think, in the future, both with the work we've done. And in fact, I just got an update from Neil Blackmore. He's our claim staker and doing the field work, and he gave us an update this morning and it's getting more and more exciting as he sees stuff, and they're back on those properties right now doing some more work. So I think we got a good news flow coming out ahead of us, and I think that this could refine the drilling that we're going to do, where we're going to drill, how many holes we're going to allocate to which area. So I think we're in a very, very good position with the financing we just completed.
Fantastic news. And Clyde, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yes, absolutely. You talked about a long-term vision, and because what we see, Murray was talking about Neil, and what we've built for NIOB is really a portfolio of where we're very convinced this could be strong projects. Most of the junior miners, they've been fully focused on copper and gold in the last few years. And so when Neil and we looked at the overall potential of these rare earth and critical mineral targets, we were seeing, should I say, those low-hanging fruit project, easy to be picked up. And so we had a question, why was it easy to be picked up? Well, one of the reasons is other junior explorers were entirely focused on entirely different commodities. But also it takes time also to properly assess a project. And thankfully, we secured those rare earths and critical mineral projects. And now we are aiming, to drill these projects where we've got high conviction. So we're planning to drill these in Q1, Q2 26, and hopefully we'll be able to announce some very positive results early next year.
Yeah, as we close out 2025, it sounds like there are a lot of great things coming out of North American niobium starting in 2026. So thank you both, gentlemen, Murray Nye, Clyde McMillan. Clearly, North American niobium aims to position itself early, as you heard from Murray, in a market that's really driven by national level demand, limited domestic supply, and growing attention to strategic minerals. Again, they are listed on the Canadian Securities Exchange as NIOB, the Frankfurt Stock Exchange is IOR, and the OTCQB is NIOMF. For more information, visit NorthAmericanNiobium.com. Thanks for joining us here on Stocks to Watch.
Thanks, Ashley.